The tragedy of Hurricane Katrina. With the news of the recent Hurricane Fiona and Hurricane Ian causing destruction, many have thought back to hurricanes of the past, one of them being Hurricane Katrina. The 2005 disaster of Hurricane Katrina severely ravaged the Gulf Coast of the United States, but one of the most severely affected locations was the city of New Orleans. The destruction Hurricane Katrina left resulted in the costliest natural disaster in the history of the United States. Hurricane Katrina's vigorous formation caused mass destruction and loss of land, crippling the individuals affected, which was made worse by a botched federal response. Hurricane Katrina was a tropical cyclone that attacked the southeast of the United States in August 2005. The National Weather Service reports that Katrina formed as a tropical depression on August 23rd in the Caribbean waters neighboring the Bahamas. As Hurricane Katrina made its initial landfall along the southeast Florida coast, the Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale measured Katrina as a Category 1 hurricane with sustained wind speeds of 80 miles per hour. After moving into the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, however, Katrina rapidly intensified and attained Category 5 status, which is the highest ranking on the scale, with sustained wind speeds measuring up to 175 miles per hour. Katrina then weakened to a Category 3 hurricane as it moved into southeast Louisiana, with sustained wind speeds dropping to 125 miles per hour. As Hurricane Katrina threatened to devastate the Gulf Coast, local governments readied themselves in order to protect their communities. History and National Geographic report that former New Orleans Mayor Ray Nagin issued the city's first evacuation order on August 28th as the National Weather Service predicted cities in Katrina's path would be inhabitable for weeks. Nagin also declared the Superdome, the largest sports arena in New Orleans, as a, quote, shelter of last resort. When Katrina reached New Orleans, about 80% of the population had evacuated, roughly 10,000 citizens sheltered in the Superdome, and tens of thousands more citizens remained home. As Katrina made landfall in New Orleans, it, as predicted by the National Weather Service, completely decimated the city. Before the storm, officials worried Katrina surge could overflow levees, resulting in short-term flooding, but officials did not predict that levees would collapse below their designed height. New Orleans had already been experiencing heavy rain before Katrina struck, but when the storm surge arrived, which was as high as 9 meters, it overwhelmed several of the city's levees and drainage canals, resulting in their collapse, which led to severe flooding. Citizens living in low-lying places such as St. Bernard Parish in 9th Ward scrambled to their attics and rooftops for safety as a result of the quickly rising water. At Katrina's peak, roughly 80% of New Orleans was submerged under some quantity of water. Those who remained in New Orleans volunteered their help to offset Katrina's damages. Citizens who remained manned boats, offered food and shelter, and supported their neighbors in need. The destruction left by Hurricane Katrina resulted in an aftermath of failed government action, severely impacting the rebuilding of New Orleans. History and National Geographic report that the Federal Emergency Agency, also known as FEMA, took several days to execute operations. Many felt that FEMA's actions reflected the government's ignorance regarding the severity of the situation, as many felt their actions were evident that the government had no idea how many people were stranded, how many homes and businesses were destroyed, and how much food, water, shelter, and overall aid people needed. Many criticized FEMA's response, citing that they were unaware and unprepared to provide reliable relief. 10 years later, one critic, former President Barack Obama, spoke out against the federal government's response. Obama said, quote, "What started out as a natural disaster became a man-made disaster, a failure of government to look out for its own citizens." Katrina's rampage also resulted in severe socioeconomic troubles. Katrina's destruction resulted in $108 billion worth of damages by the standards of 2005. making it the costliest natural disaster in the history of the United States. An estimated 1,200 to 1,800 people died as a result of the hurricane's rampage. Additionally, Katrina resulted in the displacement of over 1 million people across the region. Many of those who were not able to evacuate the city despite NAGAN's warning included the poor, the elderly, and those who lacked access to safe transport. Many people who did evacuate New Orleans or were displaced chose to permanently settle in cities such as Houston, Dallas, and Atlanta, as returning to New Orleans proved to be too difficult for many citizens. Additionally, oil and gas companies operated in New Orleans were crippled following the storm, and coastal communities that relied on tourism also suffered as the hurricane, along with coastal erosion, resulted in losses in business and infrastructure. All these factors left the city of New Orleans physically, socially, and economically altered more than a decade later. As Hurricane Fiona and Hurricane Ian pass and officials assess the damages of their respective hurricanes, they can make comparisons to past hurricanes to assess how severe that the damages were. To conclude, the 2005 disaster of Hurricane Katrina resulted in the mass destruction of the city of New Orleans, leaving the city socioeconomically altered for about a decade to come. Thank you.